Good evening. Welcome to our special program this evening, recognizing African Americans' contribution to the University of Florida and in the community. I'm Carol Richardson, the Aquin Jones Museum and Cultural Center Museum Coordinator. So it's my pleasure to welcome you this evening to what I believe is going to be a fantastic presentation from some amazing scholars and historians. I'd like to thank the Rosa B. Williams 352 Art Space for hosting this event. If any of you have visited the Aquin Jones Museum, while it's very beautiful, it's very small. So I thank them so much for allowing us to be here today. The book that we're going to be talking about this evening provides an impactful overview of the history of African American studies at the University in Florida. I am just so pleased to have you here and to have this distinguished panel of scholars. So it is my pleasure, and I'd like for you to please give them a round of applause. We're going to bring to the podium Dr. Jacob Gordon. Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you so much, Ms. Richardson. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the contributors to this book. I'm just one of the two editors. But before I do that, I'd like to ask you for a few moments of silence in honor of our two contributors who are no longer with us. The first is Dr. Patricia Nunn. She was writing her chapter when she passed, and her husband helped us to complete that chapter. The second is Judge Stephen Michaels, who passed. They're in the process of writing it. I have a chapter in the book on his life, and I want to thank members of his family for helping us to complete that chapter. So may I ask you for just a moment of silence. Thank you very much. The book we are launching this evening is a text that reflects upon the past, understanding the present, and trying to speculate about the future of African American studies at the University of Florida. The book builds on the struggles of past historians, the father of history, Carter G. Woodson, in the early 1920s, and his contemporaries. The book also builds upon the literature of the movement in the 1960s across all campuses in this country. And so without those contributions, without the struggle, there's no way we could have written this book. The book reflects and focuses on the struggle for the development and for the inclusion of blacks at the University of Florida in the late 1960s. It was about diversity, it was about accessibility, it was about inclusion of blacks into all aspects of the university operation. Hiring more faculty and staff was a part of the struggle. And making sure that the program for African American Studies was also developed to carry out the academic excellence, to reflect and to document the contributions of peoples of African descent as a part of the American story. The book also allows us to focus on the role of the community. When students came from Jacksonville to try to attend this university, how did they interact with people in the community? And so you will find chapters in the book discussing the relationship between the university and the community. We call that community engagement. And you have here this evening some of the people who wrote those chapters to share with you their work. Beyond the struggle, in the late 1960s, Nichols became the first black student to be allowed to enter the university. I wasn't here then because at the time I came here, 1960, I couldn't come to University of Florida. I went to Bethune-Cookman University that I'm very proud of. But that was the nature of the struggle. It was not just here. It was everywhere. At the University of Kansas, where I also developed a similar program, it was the same struggle all over the country to make sure that the history of black folks are not lost, are not stolen, are not given false interpretation, but the truth. And so that's a part of this book that is very important. It's not just only the university, it's also the community. It highlights some accomplishments of the program for more than 50 years, which we celebrated in 2020. And that was really the anvil on which this book was built on. We had symposium on the campus, and people presented papers. We have faculty symposium. We have student symposium. We have alumni. Then we have community engagement symposium. All of that is a part of that, the kind of Sankofa, we called it, looking back and moving forward. And so one of the greatest highlights in the book was the accomplishment of offering a degree program in the program. After I've been here for 50 years, it was not until 2013 that we started introducing a degree program, bachelor degree program in African American Studies. The book looks forward to more commitment, not only by the university, but also by the community. Commitment to create a departmental status for the program. When I went to the University of Kansas in 1970, we created a department in 1972. After my retirement in 2004, I came here to retire. They are still having a program. I said, something is wrong. So in the advisory board, we started fighting to make sure that there's a commitment by the university to create a department. Because in the academy, if you're not a department, it's a different ballgame. There's no recognition for your excellence. And so there's that commitment, and we are very, very grateful to the administration, to the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, who has given us the budget now to hire a new director, Dr. David Cannon, who is here now, and his main task is to make sure that we transform this program into a department. There are many people I would like to thank for this book, and each of them wrote chapters. Dr. Hilliard is one of them. Dr. David Helm, who is an alumni of this university, he was one of the pioneers for the black student movement. Of course, my co-editor, Dr. Paul Ortiz, is here. You'll be hearing from him in a minute. Birch is the librarian. She's a specialist in the African American history collections in the library. She has a chapter in the book. Sharon Austin looks at the contributions of the faculty. What research have they done? It's in the appendix of this book to see their contribution in terms of research, how they have helped to actually move the university towards achieving its mission, research, teaching, and public service. Dr. Barbara McDade Gordon, my lovely wife, has a chapter there that talks about how the university has engaged the community in conducting research for the improvement of quality of life of people who live in this community. My good friend, Dr. G.W. Mingo, who was the first person really to create what we called Upward Bound Program, a pre-college program that engages the community, students in high school, as well as their parents. Has a chapter in the book that I'm sure you'd like to read. Then I have my other good friend, Sherrod DuPree, who's here. You all know her. She has a wonderful chapter there looking at faith in the community and how did the university engage in terms of religion, faith in the community, which is very critical, very, very critical. My good friend, who's not here, but she is online, Dr. Harry Shaw, has a contribution in the book, a chapter in which he reflected. He was the first black associate dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, at the university here. So he has a chapter there. You'll be hearing from him later on this evening also. And I want to give a special recognition to our new director for African American Studies, Dr. David Canton, who wrote the introductory chapter, the foreword for the book, and reflected upon the struggle and history. There are a couple of other key features in the book I want to highlight very quickly. Each chapter, there are 9 chapters in this book. Each chapter ends with study questions that we allow students and readers to go deeper about that particular subject area in the book. That's a very, very special feature. It took us time to really work that out, and I'm glad it is there. A part of the appendix is a list of contributions made by the faculty from 1969, 1970 to 2020, the time we had that symposium on the campus. So these are some of the highlights. I wanted to give you the context for the book, and then my co-editor is going to talk about some extras from the book, so get you deeper into the book so you can feel it and understand what we have tried to accomplish here. I think this is a pioneering work. I don't know of any other program, any other university that has published something about their own history on their campus. Not even my own University of Gainesville. We haven't done that. They are about 50 years, but we haven't been able to produce such a volume. This is very critical, and we are very happy that you are here to hear us, and I hope we can have a good dialogue later on. Dr. Paul Ortiz, please.
Thank you so much, Professor Gordon. And I want to begin by thanking Carol Richardson and Aquin Jones Museum and the Rosa B. Williams Center for having us, and Carol really for putting so much creative energy into organizing tonight's event. So thank you so much. In fact, let's give her another round of applause. She does so much great work in this community. You know, one of the signal honors of my entire academic career, and believe it or not, this is not going to be very impressive to Jake, but this year marked my 20th year as a university professor. So am I halfway there, Jake? But out of all those years, I consider it a signal honor and tremendously humbling and incredibly educational experience to be able to work with this incredible scholar. And I don't know how many of us really appreciate what it means to have someone like Professor Jay Gordon living in our community, because this man is a legend in African and African American studies. He is a departmental founder at a major university. He's an international force in the study of the African diaspora. So I just want to give him a shout out and another round of applause. This is an exciting book. And just to echo what Dr. Gordon said, it is partially historical. It's got great details, great resources. You can get a wonderful list of articles, books, multimedia, things that faculty have done over the years in African American studies at UF. One of those big themes, which is in the book, is, and I'll talk about in a minute, is the theme of internationalism. We talk about Carter G. Woodson. This field of African American studies was born internationalist. One of the earliest African American historians, in fact, George Washington Williams, was a United States soldier. He fought in the Union Army during the Civil War. But when the war ended, he felt his battle had just begun. And so what did he do? He joined a number of other African American soldiers and went directly to Mexico to help the Mexican people fight for their freedom against the French imperialists. And see, that's what we mean by Black history is transnational. It's internationalist. And so I want to read a couple excerpts here for you. I'm going to read kind of the zoom out excerpt about the larger field of African American studies, what we try to do here at UF in terms of bringing that learning to students and members of the community. And then also I want to share with you a behind-the-scenes glimpse of how we started our Joelle Buchanan oral history collection at UF. There's a lot of gossip in this book, by the way. That makes it really fun. There's a lot of stories that were rumors. I learned some of these rumors were actually true in making this book. But let me kind of, again, I'll start by kind of zooming out at first and then zooming back in to University of Florida. Black intellectuals toiled to remind each other of the egalitarian dimensions of their battles for emancipation. This is where African American studies and oral history practices intersect. The emphasis in both disciplines is on the role of so-called ordinary people in remaking and redeeming the world. What Cedric Robinson called, quote, the Black radical tradition, emphasizing mass collective struggles while critiquing top-down models of leadership favored by the dominant society. Hence, W.E.B. Du Bois argued in Black Reconstruction in 1935 that it was the self-activity of enslaved African Americans which was the key to winning the American Civil War. In a speech given in the midst of the most perilous weeks of the conflict, Frederick Douglass made it clear that Abraham Lincoln's leadership would not win the Civil War. Douglass said, "We are not to be saved by the captain this time, but by the crew. We are not to be saved by Abraham Lincoln, but by the power behind the throne, greater than the throne itself." In the same vein, C.L.R. James in 1938 stated that the enslaved Africans in Haiti learned through hard experience not to trust their leaders to carry out the revolution needed to achieve independence from the French Empire. While the figure of General Toussaint Louverture was one of the most remarkable men of a period rich in remarkable men, James recalled, James urges his readers to understand, quote, "Yet Toussaint did not make the revolution. It was the revolution that made Toussaint. And even that is not the whole truth." W.E.B. Du Bois, C.L.R. James, Frederick Douglass, and so many other Black intellectuals understood that placing the African diaspora at the center of global history was a way of anchoring Black labor, identities, and social movements to demonstrate that people of African descent were integral to the emergence of democracy in the modern world, indeed, even modernity itself. Realizing that he was delivering one of the final speeches of his life, Frederick Douglass asked his enthusiastic audience at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago to view their experiences as one of the great epics of world history. As Douglass recounted pivotal moments of the abolitionist movement, his audience became active participants in the creation of a global origin narrative of liberation from the grassroots. Douglass concluded, "Speaking for the Negro, I can say, we owe much to David Walker for his appeal, to John Brown for the blow struck at Harper's Ferry, to Lundy and Garrison for their advocacy. We owe much especially to Thomas Clarkson," and after he mentions every individual, there's applause in brackets. "To William Wilberforce, to Thomas Fuller Buxton," and again, Douglass is going international here. These are international abolitionists. And of course, to the anti-slavery societies at home and abroad. But we owe incomparably more to Haiti than to them all. And in the brackets for the person transcribing the speech, it says prolonged applause. After Frederick Douglass says, we owe incomparably more to Haiti than to them all. I regard her as the original pioneer emancipator of the 19th century. And if you look at the back in the book at the works and again, the books, the articles, the multimedia publications by the scholars and the students and the faculty at UF African American Studies, you'll see that theme of internationalism, of transnationalism continues. because we have these amazing scholars. We have them here. We have people like Chris Busey, who works on Afro-Latino studies. We have Sharon Austin, who focuses on the Caribbean. We have Manushka Celeste. We have Tanya Saunders, who focuses on Afro-Cuban hip-hop music, right? And so that theme of transnationalism continues to be something that's very strong in our program here. So let me conclude by bringing things back. I'll zoom in and share a little bit of gossip with you, which is in this book, which again was a rumor, but actually I can say was actually is true. So when I arrived here in 2008, I arrived here during a great time to be a director of an oral history program. The first message I received from the dean's office was that due to the Great Recession, my budget was being zeroed out. Not cut. Anyone who's been an administrator knows the meaning of zeroed out. So a couple weeks later, Joelle Buchanan, who many of you know, comes to my office and he says, Paul, we need to start a major African-American oral history initiative. And I said, Joelle, did you know that my budget just got canceled out? He said, don't worry about that. Come with me, we're gonna go to the president's office. Really? Okay. This was the kind of person that Joelle Buchanan was. He fought and worked so hard on behalf of this community, especially in Black history. He was not going to be, he wasn't something somebody you told no to. And so I wanted to read to you, there's a longer passage here, but I just wanted to read to you a couple paragraphs that describe the meeting that we had with President Bernie Machen, who was president at UF at the time. Joelle Buchanan was an excellent organizer. As a librarian at UF Smathers Library's Special Collections Department, he brokered several discussions between the Proctor Oral History Program, library staff, and then UF President Bernie Machen about the prospects of beginning an oral history project with an intensive focus on African American life and experiences in Florida. Joelle insisted that the work begin with an emphasis or with a focus on local Black history, and President Machen agreed with this emphasis. In the course of these dialogues led by Joelle, a research agenda began to take shape. According to my notes of a meeting that included Joelle Buchanan, Bernie Machen, and me on January 30th, 2009, these are directly from the notes. So they gotta be true, right? Not from my memory, because the notes were a little different than my memory. So it was interesting going back and looking at the notes. From January 30th, 2009, an overarching theme of the research proposal is to interview African Americans who came of age in the era prior to Brown v. Board of Education. However, we will also pose questions relevant to the 1960s and 70s as well. One area of obvious focus is the various ways that African Americans encountered UF as staff, students, et cetera, along with the oral histories. And emphasis will be on collecting extant papers, documents, and quote, ephemera related to Black history and getting those to the archives before they are lost. This included two female Korean War veterans, Ernestine Dave and Dorothy Marshall, narrating their experiences. And just to kind of wrap up my part of this, Joelle and I insisted, and he, of course, leading me in the back, if you will, supporting, that we had to be very candid about UF's role in African American history. And Professor Sherrod DuPree was actually with us on that first panel that we did that was mediated or facilitated by Joelle Buchanan, in which people like Mrs. Evelyn Mickle, people like Dan Harmling, and others gave us a very candid assessment of race relations at the University of Florida over the last several decades. President Machen, by the way, was sitting in the front row with his wife, Chris. The day after that event, a dear colleague who shall remain nameless came up to me and said, well, Paul, I guess you're going to be looking for another job. And I said, well, what do you mean? Well, I was looking at President Machen during that presentation with Joelle Buchanan, and he looked very unhappy at that information coming out about UF and race relations. And I said, we'll see. A week later, I got a phone call. President Machen had given $150,000 to start this project. That's the power of Joelle Buchanan and the faith he had in Black history. And so to conclude my part, I think it's really incumbent on us, please read the book. It's really exciting, a lot of great stories, great resources, but it's up to all of us here to think about where we want to take African American studies next. Yeah, let's get a department for sure. Let's grant, let's start a PhD program, absolutely. But also, how are we going to continue to make African American studies relevant as a force for social justice and improving the lot of everyone? So thank you so much for for coming out tonight. It's a real honor to be here. I hope you get a chance to read the book.
My name is Barbara McDade Gordon, and I retired from the University of Florida 6 years ago. And what I planned to do in retirement, I was going to learn how to play the flute, I was going to take up portrait painting, and I was going to write a nice racy historical novel about my grandmother. Well, I have done neither, and some of it is because of my husband who engaged me, and I was very happy to contribute to this volume. It has been a wonderful experience in learning more about the history of African American studies here at the university. I was in the African Studies department, and we dovetailed in a large measure with African American studies. But it has truly been a pleasure, and seeing you come out to hear the stories, and which means that they will continue these stories and this mission to go from program into a department and to have this sustainability here at the University of Florida, where the population, Black population, has gone from 15% since I've been here, when I first came here, to 17%. It can be done. I think when Jake went to the University of Kansas, the Black population was like 3%. So, the story is there, and it's an American story. It's a global story. Now, when I first came here to Gainesville in 1990, as a new faculty member, I was told, my area was economic geography, economic development, and my area, as I said, was in Africa. And I was basically told, don't really bother with local research or local involvements, because Gainesville, it's a small town, and if you really want to make a mark, you go at the state or the national or the international level. And so, I said, well, okay. So I immediately joined the Gainesville Area Black Business Association, which had been recently started by John Dukes III, and it was a great experience. Someone knows about that. And I feel that if you're going to be living in a community, then you must be a part of it. Now, I must admit that I was really sort of surprised that Gainesville generally seemed to, embrace the Gators and the University of Florida. The first football game after my son came here, he was at Hart Bishop, and he said, Mom, I've got to get Gator gear. And kids in his class, these are 8th graders, they had, the tattoos, and they sprayed their hair orange and blue, and they were really into it. People would go up to the band shell, and you would think that that's what a university town looks like, right? But when I was at the University of Texas at Austin, and it's a great university, but for the most part, because of its history, the African American community hated University of Texas. It was like a force field around there. They didn't come. Not even the maintenance staff. They just didn't. They didn't like it, and they did not come. So it wasn't that same feeling. So immediately I saw that it was somewhat different the way the community perceived the University of Florida, even though I must admit the University of Florida was not yet that involved from a research standpoint with the local community. Of course, there were some who, they're in the book and I'm familiar with. Carolyn Tucker, Dr. Carolyn Tucker. Now, you talk about a legend. She's a legend. She has been so involved in the community and looking at improving the health care, the mental and physical health care of the community. And that's the type of things that a university should do. The University of Florida is a public institution. It's a public university. And the mission of this public university, and I just want to read this out, according to its mission statement, the University of Florida is a comprehensive learning institution dedicated to excellence in education and research to shape a better future for Florida. That's all of us, the nation and the world. The three interlocking elements, teaching, research, and service, represent the university's commitment to serve the state of Florida, its people, the United States, and the global community. Central to its mission is the commitment to share the benefits of UF research and knowledge for the public good. So people like Carolyn Tucker and others, my very good friend and colleague, Bertha Cato, who did research at the middle schools to try to help students improve their GPAs and sort of their performance at the school, Dolores James and others. So this was really very eye-opening. As I said, my son was a student at Howard Bishop, and so there I was drawn into the community, which is really good. This really helped me. Maybe I would have, taken my department chair's advice and sort of shied away a little from involvement in the Gainesville community, but, you have a student at the public school here, that's your instant in the PTA, you're going there, you're meeting with other parents, and then there's Gainesville High School and the Band Parents Association. So it was really a part of being integrated into the community. I remember getting involved in the East Gainesville Development Task Force. This was in the late 90s. And I was really very happy to see that, unlike sometimes you hear about these town gown frictions or antagonisms, it seems like, and I was really happy to hear this, that people in the community seemed to think that we were doing something right. We were teaching something over here for the students here at the University of Florida, and that information would be helpful to the community. So I encouraged my students. I told them, they are looking for you to be on these commissions, on these boards. And they really were. They welcomed them. Now, sometimes there's some friction, but I told them, especially, and I don't know whether you think of this or not, but when they had the ban on drinking after 12 o'clock or something like that. I said, you all maybe better get down there and see if you can work on these laws because they directly affect you. But at any rate, it was good to see it. Now, as I said, the University of Florida could certainly do more. Now, some of this is the community, certainly at that time. This was the 1990s when I came here. And this is the Great Society and the civil rights and the post-civil rights era of research. Many black communities in this country had been, researched out. They were leery of these reports, people coming to their communities, asking all these questions, doing all these probings. And so they were somewhat reluctant. They were tired of being subjects. However, this prompted faculty members, administrators, as Paul was mentioning, and others to see that you have to approach the community as partners and not as objects. And so this certainly helped a lot. Now, in the book, where I have in the chapter that I wrote, it's 3 parts of it. Our community engagement with University of Florida faculty, Dr. Mingo, of course, who directed the very popular and impactful Upward Bound program for almost 30 years, and Sherrod DuPree, who looks at, as Jake said, the faith-based approach in the community. And there's some young scholars, for instance, and you may have read this about Dr. Diane Nicole Champion. She's in the Center for Arts in Medicine and Arts, and she recently received a $750,000 grant to work with young people in the community. She works at middle schools, to work with there and see how art increases students' self-esteem, and that propels them to believe in themselves to go forward. So you are so, we just talk, you are so very informed. So she works with this. My colleague in the College of Arts, Welson Tremura, he's from Brazil originally, and he has performances where he involves people, African Americans, non-African Americans, all other people, Latinos, Hispanics, whites, whoever is in the community, performing at Bo Diddley Plaza, bringing the entertainment as well as information, that research to the community. Eric Jefferson Siegel at the Harn Museum, and they have a wonderful program. I love the Harn Museum. I just love to go over there. It's such a nice environment. I haven't been over there lately, well, maybe a couple weeks ago, but about a month or so ago, but I used to go there all the time. But because of COVID, we've sort of been, closed in a bit. He's responsible for designing programs that engage faculty and students at UF, and at Santa Fe and other areas. He works with students, bringing them in to the area. Early learning programs at the Harn, science nights, class tutors, collaborations with teachers, outreach. The School of Architecture. Now, I'm on the board of the Cotton Club Museum and Cultural Center, and Dr. Kiner at the Schooler, who unfortunately died last year, he was very much involved in getting funding to help to rebuild and preserve in historical preservation for the Cotton Club and other things. So Bruce Steiner, Catherine Frank and Catherine Lawson, they've been working with planners and with the communities. Kindergarten to fifth grade students. You probably know Dr. Adams, Thomasina Adams, in math and math education. She has written so many books for students, for grade school students, which engage them in mathematics. Women, girls, as well as young students in mathematics, so they could get rid of their math phobia. I have often said, I was a pretty good math student, but I sometimes said, I wish I had gone into math. So I could be a person who's not, let's say, a genius in math or such an expert, where I could teach math to other people like me where they could learn it. And I think some of those, some of what Dr. Adams is teaching is like that. We now also have in the computer science department, we have a young African American department chair, and he brought a whole bevy of his faculty from Clemson a couple of years ago, and they have been engaged in this community over the past 6 years. Here's Dr. Garner, Christina, a young woman, who is looking at computer and information science. She's working directly in the schools, getting kids more engaged in this stuff, taking it out of the nerd universe and getting it where people understand that it's something that they want to be involved in. She does outreach efforts, Eastside High School, cybersecurity summer camp, robotic training programs. Also, my friend in Health and Human Performance looks at healthcare, wellness, behaviors among women, and how we can have a better life. Health issues among African American women. She has an electronic publication. She has what are those things called? I'll think about it. Podcast, right? She has one of those that you can, and she says, "Come on, sisters, keep it tight, sisters." That's the title of it. And then, of course, Patricia Hilliard-Nunn, who is an icon of our community, who was gone too soon, but she left such a legacy. It's almost like we don't have to miss her, because what she has contributed, what she had contributed to this community, it's all around us. It's all around us. Dr. Kevin McCarthy was in the English department, a white professor, and he was just really interested in African American history, and he worked with African American historians in university at Florida A&M. This was way back in the 80s and 90s, in producing African American sites in Florida. So we have all of these people, and as I mentioned, Dr. Carol Tucker, and I also have Paul Ortiz, who has done such a wonderful job. And I remember, I don't know if that was that same date, when I was over there at Library East, we were having something, and I believe Joelle Buchanan was there. And Dr. Manchin, President Manchin, he saw what Paul was doing, and right there on the spot, he gave him $75,000. So that interest, that engagement, this is something. Now, we have a long way to go. There are miles to go before we sleep at the University of Florida. But the University of Florida is your institution, it's our institution. We pay taxes on this school. It's why it's here. And this is something that the university knows that this is its mission, and I think it's working to help fulfill that mission. Keep its feet to the fire. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gwenuel W. Mingo. Most people know me as G.W. Mingo or just Mingo. And the reason for that, I have an odd first name, which I'm proud of the fact that I'm the one and only one with a name like that. That's why my son is not a junior. He would have had a whole lot of problems like I had coming up if you didn't call me by my name. I'm either going to be running or you're going to be running, one of the two, somebody, because there's going to be some sophistication going on. But anyhow, I'm originally from Key West, Florida, and I happened to come to Gainesville just by accident. I was on my way to Key West to get a position as an assistant principal down there. Just gotten out of the military, spent about 7 years in the military, Vietnam experience, all that kind of stuff. So I'm all ready to settle down. Stopped in Tallahassee. I'm a graduate of Florida A&M, by the way. Stopped there, checked with one of my friends who was a professor of military science at the time. And I told him what I was doing. He said, "Man, you should go by Gainesville. They got all kind of jobs in Gainesville." I'd never been to Gainesville in my life. I didn't even know what this place was. When I graduated from high school, I couldn't come here. There was no way for me to come here. So I had to go to either Bethune-Cookman or Florida A&M, or you got, you had Florida Memorial and one other school there. Everett Waters. Those are schools in Florida that I had to come to. So when I was in high school, I was taking agriculture. Now, let me back a little bit. I'm from Key West, but I didn't graduate from high school in Key West. I ended up leaving Key West, going to Tampa, Florida, and that's where I got into agriculture, because there's no agriculture in Key West. So people wonder, well, how did you major in agriculture from Key West? So I had to put that part in there about how I got involved with this thing through Tampa. So this agriculture teacher told me, said, "Man, you should go to college. You're college material." And what I said, yeah. That was it. I wasn't going to college. No one in my family had been to college. And my mother said to me and others, "I'd be glad when that boy just get out of high school." She didn't even get into high school. My dad was the one that graduated, but I came from a dysfunctional family. They weren't together, raised by my grandmother. Okay, let me back out. That was a little background about me, who I am. So I ended up coming to Gainesville, Florida, on my way to Key West. I stopped in Taggart Hall and just happened to go in there. I didn't know anybody. So I ended up talking with a retired general. I forgot this name right now. So I talked with this retired general. This guy said, "Well, we had some similar experience." He was in agriculture. I was field artillery. I was also an officer. I had combat experience, all this kind of stuff. Same thing with him. He said, well, I don't have a job for you, but I know a gentleman down in the housing area. He's a full-bird colonel. Just go to talk to this guy. End up, he's field artillery. Some similar experiences. Now, for you all don't know about the military and especially field artillery, that's a technical field. And they knew that if this guy came out field artillery and he's an officer, we might want to try to get him to work here. So I told them, hey, I'm just passing through here. They said, well, could you wait for a couple of days? I said, I don't have any place to stay. I don't know anybody here at all. So the housing guy put me up in the dormitory, one of the counselors of apartments there, for about a week or so. And I'm trying to, these guys keep me around here for a whole week. Then they told my wife, you should go down to the school board. She goes down there, they hire her, and I'm telling them, hey, I don't have a job. How my wife, so I'm trying to figure out how's all this stuff working. But this is what I found out, why they wanted me to stay around here. They needed black males or black individuals here because they just had a riot. This black student in 71 decided, hey, they're just going to blow up the place or leave it or whatever they're going to do to it. So they had to check me out. And the reason I found out they checked me out, I came out of Missouri to Florida. So they were calling people back then. I'm finding out, hey, what they calling them for? They say, well, they were checking on you to find out if I was the militant type or the real docile type of individual. So once they found out, well, this guy has been above ground and above, he's a level. So they hired me. I ended up staying at the housing for from 71 to 74. Now, the director of housing said, Mingo, you should apply for that upward bound position. I said, upward bound? I didn't even know about upward bound. So I told him, I said, well, I'm doing okay here. I like what I'm doing. Why you want me to go? He said, Mingo, not that we think you need to go to this place. It might be a little better for you. I said, I don't believe so. So I told him I wanted to stay. No, he said, you go and apply anyway. I went up and applied anyway. Lo and behold, I get the job. So I'm trying to figure out what's going on here. I think what they were doing, and like I said, they needed black males here. And so I was one, I turned out to be, my credentials checked out and everything was above board, and I wasn't the militant that they thought they were going to get. Anyhow, April of 74 was when I assumed the position as director of the Upward Bound program. I stayed there until 2003. And during that time, I was involved with a lot of things that they were not good for keeping people around. Now, having the military experience, I could deal with pressure because I've been in a lot of situations, a lot of stuff that most of you all would be able to do. Some of you can't. I think Dr. Ortiz might know some of the stuff that we get involved with in the military. But anyhow, my experience at the University of Florida was not always a positive one. But my goal was to do the best that I possibly could do for that program that I was involved with. Because coming from a dysfunctional family, the background, everything, I saw these kids the same as I was. And I said, I can do something to help them to move up the line. So I was committed to doing the best that I could possibly do in that Upward Bound program. Now, not only did I have a problem just running the program, I had a problem with the administration. Because they haven't seen anybody like me before. They could not intimidate me. They couldn't force me to get out of this thing. That's basically what they were trying to do. Because there was a revolving door. Blacks were coming in, they were going out. The same thing for the students. So I did not fit that kind of thing. So my goal was to stay here and get this thing working. And so I spent a lot of time, a lot of effort trying to make that thing work. This is the other part of it. When I got the job, the federal government really was about to cut it. They were going to cut it. They had people down here. They went through a program, an evaluation process, and they were going to let it go. I had to rewrite the grant, the whole works, and we got the money back. So they came back down again about a year or so, and they wanted to know what was really going on. How did you do what you're doing? Have you ever had experience before with the up and down program? I said, no. What I had experience at, my military experience, I can read manuals, I can figure out things, I can make things work. And that's what I ended up doing with that program. Not only was I working with the Upward Bound program, that was a program for high school students, getting them prepared for college. We would get them in the 9th grade, and if they stayed with us the 12th grade, 85% of those would go into college. That's the kind of success rate we had. 85% of them went to college. We have one I'm here right now, Tennessee State University. Okay. And his parents. The other part of the thing was the parents were very, very essential and effective in that Upward Bound program. Without those parents, I could not have done what I did. We have one I'm here right now, Miss Lucille Miles, right there. Okay. Now, I want to tell you about Miss Miles. In 1982, the federal government told us that our proposal was not going to be funded. And I told the university what was going on. And I want to read this to you. And this is the kind of response that I got back. I'll read this little part. During the 1982 school year, we submitted our proposal for funding only to learn that it would not be funded. The dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences was informed of this matter, and he informed the vice president of academic affairs, and his response was, I do not believe it is appropriate for us to use general revenue dollars to fund a program that has its participants who are not students at this university or persons who may never enroll at this university. The vice president went on to say that the university should make no attempt to restore funding for the Upward Bound program. After calling the U.S. Department of Education many times to inquire about our proposal, specifically the scores earned and for each evaluated objective and data to justify the need for the program, the department would not give me any information. So it was suggested that we go to Washington and meet with someone face to face. That's where Ms. Miles comes in here. Two parents, Ms. Lucille Miles and Ms. Dolores Johnson, accompanied me to Washington. Now, there are no funds for them to go anywhere from that grant. This is how we're going to, the parents were so effective, they had their own bank account, okay? So they could get money and do what they wanted to do with it. And the University of Florida was trying to get me to have them to run that money through the University of Florida. I said, no, that's their money. They can do what they want to do with it. So they bought their tickets. We went to Washington. Now, when we got to Washington, Miss Lucille Miles and Miss Dolores Johnson were dressed as professionals, and they thought that they were on my staff because of the kind of question they were asking, the logical responses and everything. I mean, they had this stuff together. Parents were really, really up, and they're very effective. Those parents that asked questions were direct and logical. Many of their questions were about the scoring process and how it was determined that this program was not even in the Gainesville, Florida area. The parents cited students' names who had gone off to college and now are teachers, engineers, pharmacists, and productive citizens. Now, the parents also conducted a little research while they were in, and we're not going to tell them what kind of research you did. They conducted a little research while we're in Washington because they took me aside and had me in another office, and they were in there collecting data. So when we came back to Gainesville, we used that against the Department of Education, and we got our money back. Okay. Okay. So those parents, they were real effective, and so that's the kind of support that I had in running this Upward Bound program. So people say, "Oh, you did a great job." No, if it were not for these parents would not have been able to do what I did. I found a letter just recently, Mr. Strickland, when we wrote a letter to Lawton Childs, telling him about our program and the problem he had. He responded back to her. I got to give that to Miss Strickland for her files. But those are the kind of things. They were calling, they were writing, they were doing all they could do to let people know that program is effective and need to stay in Gainesville. Okay? I also had the opportunity, and I brought 2 of these books here. These are, it's a 1988 and 89, the Department of Labor, Health, and Human Service, Education, and Related Agencies. This is the Senate hearings. I had the fortune of participating in 2 testimonies there in Washington, testifying before Congress the need for these programs, not just for the Upper Bound program here, but for the whole nation. Because during this time, there was a plan to just eliminate the Department of Education completely. And so I had to go and testify before Congress on 2 occasions. Now, it's not that I was so effective in my communication to get these senators and representatives to fund these programs, but it was the action of parents like Ms. Lucille. That was the kind of pressure that was on them. It not only from Florida, but it was nationwide. We had all that pressure going up to Washington, and it turned this thing around. Because during that time, I mean, things were really hard. They didn't want us to function or be effective at all. And the same thing was happening at the University of Florida. So it wasn't all peaches and cream here. A lot of these administrators, I mean, they didn't care. And people say, well, you know, you might lose your job. And I say, well, I get another job. I've never been afraid of working anywhere. And I'll find a job to support my family. So I just did what I had to do. I did have a problem with the University of Florida, and as a matter of fact, Jake, I really didn't want to write this at all. I tell you what. And my wife and my daughter said, yeah, I think you need to write something here. My experiences at the University of Florida, again, they were not all positive. And so I didn't want nothing to do with the University of Florida. So, so I was forced by my wife and my daughter to do something, and I just want to let you know that. But I'm glad I did it because people want your book. You know, they've been asking me, where's the book? Not just to hear what I had to say, but they want that book to find out more about the history of blacks or African Americans at the University of Florida. I had one other item here I wanted to talk about. Let's briefly give me here a few minutes here. Okay. Yeah, about student involvement. Yeah. It was very important for me to have the support of the parents, but also had the support of students behind me. But that was very effective because the fact that they got the instruction and the training that we gave them and they went off to college and they graduated, that was a big statement, a really big statement. And so I decided that what I would do, because those students did what they did, right now any student who graduated from college while I was director, all they have to do is let me know. Now, not tell me, I need to see the proof that they graduated from that college. And I will send them in the mail, or I'll personally give to them a little token of appreciation. Now, the first token of appreciation when they get their bachelor's degree, I gave them I'll give you the amount, $25. Okay, I'll send that to them. If they get the master's degree, I'll double what I gave them the first time. They get the $50. They get the PhD or the legal degree, I double that. So they can pick up like $175 from me. And I had quite a few of them already. I don't know, Harold, whether you've done that yet now. But if you haven't, you need to do that. Okay, so I appreciate what they have done, and that was my token of appreciation for them. One last thing before I go. Not only did I direct the Upper Bound program, but I had another program called the Student Support Services Program. It was called Special Services at one time. They changed it to Student Support Services. That was with the college students. Now, the University of Florida really didn't appreciate what I was doing for them. because we didn't have a whole lot of black students at the University of Florida in the first place, and we were trying to keep them there. So the same thing I was doing for the upward bound students, I was doing for the college students, keeping them at the University of Florida to graduate. This was my message to them. You didn't come here for the orange and the blue. You came here to get a degree, okay? That's what you came for. I just talked with 2 of them down in Orlando where I just left. They are ministers in the African Methodist Episcopal Church right now. And the young lady said, you didn't realize that that we would turn out the way we turned out, did you? I said, I knew you had the potential, but I didn't realize you were going to be a preacher. So there are 2 preachers down in Orlando right now. And so I had a problem at the university in dealing with those students because in that they didn't want to support what I was trying to do for them. And the University of Florida is benefiting because they're graduating. At the time, we had about 30 or 40% of students that would come in who were graduating. That was a lot higher than a lot of institutions throughout the nation, okay? That was very high, but they didn't appreciate that. That was my dissertation, too. I'd use that as part of my dissertation, okay? So if you want to check that out, you can. But I've had some good times and some bad times at the University of Florida, but the best time I had was with these TRIO programs. That's Upward Bound program and the Student Support program. And having parents like Miss Miles and Miss Johnson and Miss Strickland and all those other and students, you know, who were effective, that sort of like lifted me and that kept me going. And I appreciate what you all have done for the University of Florida and this community. Thank you.
Okay. Hello. My name is Stephanie Birch, and I formerly was the African American Studies librarian at the University of Florida from about 2016 until January of this year. Now I am the Africana Studies librarian at the University of Connecticut, but I still live in Gainesville for a little bit longer. And I'm just going to share a little bit about what the chapter that I wrote in the book is about. And I want to say first that I'm very appreciative to have been included in the 50th anniversary symposium and in the book, because I think that it's really special to feature or to include the libraries or a librarian and library collections in a book like this. I think that it would be really easy to overlook a librarian and library collections in a discussion like this. So the chapter is so right off the top, one of the things that I start off with is the history of the libraries, George A. Smathers libraries, and the African American collections. It's really important to, I think, begin there because the beginning of collecting African American collections in the libraries begins around the time of the development of Black Studies at UF. And it's interesting how it evolved because they had to put the Black collections in rare books and that was in special collections. This is according to the university historian Carl Van Ness, who, and actually a lot of the original collections, the general circulating collections, still remains in rare books, where actually a lot of those materials are in fact now are rare books. But when they were initially collected, they were not rare books. And they were put there, though, because of the fear that they would be stolen or destroyed in the 70s. So this was written around the time of Black Thursday, right? So that's a really, I think, interesting start to the history of African American collections at UF. So that's where we're beginning. And where we are now, I think it's an interesting trajectory. And where we're going in the future, we'll see, right? Okay, so next we move on to influential librarians. One you've already heard about, Joelle Buchanan, who was at the libraries from 2004 to 2010. That was before my time, so I unfortunately was not around to meet him, but I've heard so much about him, and I had the pleasure of working with the Joelle Buchanan oral history collection extensively. Jana Ronan is another librarian who recently retired from the libraries. And I also want to shout out to Florence Turcott, who is still working at the UF Libraries as the African American archivist. And then myself, I was the first African American librarian, and so I'm looking forward to finding out who my successor will be. I also provide an overview of the general and special collections with some insight on some of the major special collections for African American studies. This includes the Aquin Jones collection, the Zora Neale Hurston papers, the papers for the Black Student Union, which is a recent collection, and includes information about Black Thursday, and the James Haskins collection. I also overview other collections with substantial holdings for African American and Caribbean materials, as well as digital collections with African American holdings. However, I also talk about something that may be unexpected in this chapter, which is that libraries are more than just materials. I felt that it was really important to highlight what else we do in the libraries to support and advance African American studies. So I talk about research support services and teaching and instruction. So one of the things that I did a lot during my time at UF was I supported students in research consultations. I spent a lot of time actually working one-on-one with students and helping them learn how to navigate the research process and develop their research skills and talk through their ideas and identify sources and just spending a lot of time with them and learning about what their interests were and how we could kind of craft their projects together. And so building relationships with students in the African American Studies program is a really rewarding experience for me. And that is something that I think is a really important responsibility for an African American Studies librarian to step into. Instruction is another one. So I think a lot of people don't realize that librarians actually do teach. We just teach in a different way. And so that's just something I thought was really interesting to highlight, really important to highlight in the book. Another thing was grantsmanship. In our initiatives to advance Black studies through developing collections, digital collections, special projects that support the development of all things libraries that can contribute to the advancement of curriculum and research and Black studies and multidisciplinary research in all areas of UF life. And exhibitions is another thing, and I want to shout out, I told Carol I would shout out the Aquin Jones exhibit that we worked on about Lincoln High School. That was one of the exhibits that I worked on in my time. And then also I offer insights on the library's role as a partner in teaching and research in African American studies as it continues to grow at UF. So for me, from where I stand now, this has to happen hand in hand in lockstep. As the Black studies at UF grows, as they try to advance into a department, the libraries has to be actively involved in this because that will inevitably involve aspirational goals to developing graduate programs, master's and PhD programs. This means that collection support has to grow with that. Services in teaching and research support have to advance with that. And I also urge the community to call on the libraries to fill the position of the African American Studies librarian immediately. And then also to continue to push for the development of a department. This is something that I think we have to do continuously because it's been 50 years, over 50 years actually now, in the making. And we need to continuously push to ensure that this is something that does happen and apply the pressure. So the partnership between the libraries and African American Studies certainly includes collections, development, services, other types of partnerships like with grants, programs. Yes, all of these things certainly, but it also includes allowing Black intellectuals and the discipline of African American studies to transform librarianship practices and policies. So some examples of this are academic libraries at predominantly white institutions, and also the librarianship profession as a whole needs to address, or needs to do a bunch of things. Here are some examples. Redressing harm, library-driven harm, caused to Black communities, both past and present. Addressing racism that Black library patrons, and at UF this means students, faculty, staff, community members, experience in library spaces. Dismantling racism within library classification and organizational systems. What did I write there? Evaluating and developing collections to improve the diversity of scholarly voices within the collections. And to support career development and the retention of Black librarians and library staff. And to echo what Barbara said, this is where we need to hold at UF, taking it back to UF, we need to continuously be holding the feet to the fire. This is accountability, and we need to rely on the UF community and the off-campus community to do this. This is about accountability, and that accountability is needed now just as it was in 1971, because if we do not have that accountability, we will not be able to advance into a department. Thank you.
Before I call the last speaker, we have one of the contributors online. I hope we have not missed him. Dr. Shaw, are you there?
Dr. Gordon, Dr. Ortiz, fellow contributors, I'm grateful for the opportunity to be a part of this launching of the book, African American Studies, 50 Years at the University of Florida. The chapter I wrote for this book is entitled Reflections on the History of the African American Studies Program at the University of Florida. It includes both my professional and personal observations and my direct involvement and my personal involvement in the program and its development from its beginning in 1970 through its 50th anniversary in 2020. The chapter first notes that the African American Studies program grew out of demands by Black student activists to fill an academic need and to counteract continuous racial violence against African Americans throughout the 1960s, including lynchings, bombings, assassinations, especially the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King in 1968. Next, the chapter discusses the program's beginning with the hiring of Dr. Ronald C. Foreman as its first director in 1970, and the next year in 1971, when there were only 3 Black professors, 1 Black administrator, and 387 Black students, the program awarded its first certificate. The chapter describes how when I came to the university in 1973, the small one-room office of African American Studies was located on the 4th floor of Little Hall, but it was by no means the penthouse. The University of Florida was under a court order in those early days to desegregate, meaning that it had the problem of enrolling more Black students and hiring more Black faculty members, two elements that were also extremely important to the success of the African American Studies program. Black student enrollment was greatly increased early on by the determined efforts of Mr. John Boatwright, Director of Minority Admissions, followed by the creative and continuous efforts of Mr. Walter Robinson and Mr. Mike Powell from the admissions office. I was fortunately able to join others in the recruitment and retention of African American students through various programs that I either participated in, supervised, created, or directed. It turns out that I was able to join others to help the African American Studies program in another fundamental way, increasing the numbers of Black faculty at the University of Florida. Working with Dr. Jacqueline Hart, Affirmative Action Coordinator, we set up what we called the Vita Bank. I sent out letters to new Black PhDs and ABDs across the country requesting Vitas. Then I sent letters to all University of Florida departments informing them of the project and asking whether or not they had vacancies. Altogether, in the first year of serious recruitment through this process, we hired 14 new Black faculty members. Among them was Dr. Mildred Hill-Luban, who became a very important part to the early African American Studies program. In 1977, again through the Vita Bank, we hired an unprecedented 20 Black faculty members. Among this group, Mr. James Haskins, who as a scholar, writer, and professor added immensely to the African American Studies program in terms of prestige, attractiveness, and leadership. Next, the chapter discusses the program's progress toward departmental status by pointing out that while African American Studies programs at some universities achieved departmental status early on, some have never achieved it, even at prestigious universities. At some universities, support for African American Studies was discontinued, and at others, African American Studies became a subset of other academic units, such as history departments. At the University of Florida, the program's progress was slow and grew out of the sustained efforts over a period of many years by Dr. Foreman and all the program directors who followed him, each making significant contributions. They include, in order, Doctors Daryl Scott, Marilyn Thomas Houston, Terry Mills, Faye Harrison, Stephanie Evans, and Dr. Sharon Austin, under whose leadership the program became one of the fastest growing majors at the University of Florida and had among the largest numbers of African American studies majors in the country. Most notably, with the aligned support and cooperation of Dr. David Richardson, Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, Dr. Joseph Glover, Provost, and Dr. Kent Fox, President of the University of Florida, Dr. Austin was able to lead the final successful effort to achieve approval to develop the long-sought departmental status for African American Studies. It is noted that Dr. James Exegbe served from 2019 to 2020 as interim director of the program, and subsequently Dr. David Canton was selected as the new director of the program, effective August 2020, to lead the program on its final leg to departmental status. Fittingly, the African American Studies program in 2019 moved its offices to adequate and suitable space on the first floor of Turlington Hall. The chapter ends with the observation that African American studies is essential to any clear understanding and any true presentation of the American experience. Thank you.
Okay, are we ready to go forward?
Please do.
All right, thank you. It's an honor to stand before you this evening to talk about a book that's going to do very, very well. I've already shared it with some of my friends, and they said, wow, so when did the University of Florida get this sophisticated? I said, hey, they've been that way for a long time. You just didn't know. But let me give you a little background. I came to the University of Florida in 1977. The reason I came was because my husband was hired in the geography department. We were both students at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. So my husband came, took the job, and you know the wife is going to follow. And I had a little baby at that time. And so I said, I don't think I want to work. Herb said, well, if they offer you something, take it. I didn't have to wait. They put me to work right away. As soon as I got here, Beth Daney passed, and a lot of you may not know who she is, but Beth Daney was head of the library science program at the University of Florida. And when she passed, it was just mayhem for a few weeks over there. So they said, this lady has a background in library science, she has 2 masters, and she can handle it. So they put me in the classroom in the Department of Education. Well, no, they flipped me out of that and sent me over to the English department. And there in the English department, I taught full-time for 2 years, the library science courses. I had no prep time, but I got right in there and I could manage, and we did well. I was hired as a reference librarian, as the first reference librarian in 1977. But I did not work the reference desk other than occasionally, because my time was preparing for the classes. I had 150 students and 4 classes. Can you imagine? These were sophomores and juniors. And of course, they didn't want to hire anyone else, so they had myself, and then we had a lady named Kim. So the 2 of us managed those courses for quite some time, and occasionally I would go to the desk. And then they said, well, since you're here and you're the only African American, we're going to have you work with the African American students. And that was fine. And I did that on the side. And of course, Mr. Mingo, I knew you. And Pat Moran was the second one to come in there. But even before Pat Moran, we had another African American lady there. And of course, she had interlibrary loans. And she laughed. She said, nobody ever sees me. I'm upstairs in interlibrary loan. I'm in the hideout up here. And that was Marva Coward. And some of you may know Marva Coward. You knew her father, who was very active here in politics, and we have an area named for him today. So that's the early beginning for myself and my husband, Herb DuPree. He'll be back in here in a couple of minutes. And we started here at the University of Florida. But the purpose of my talk today is religious connections, the Pentecostal initiative at the University of Florida, and how we have interacted with the community. Yes, I came and I worked at the reference desk. And I had a young man to stop at the reference desk. I worked usually in the afternoons. After my classes, I would sometimes work from 3 to 4:30 or what have you. And this gentleman came in, his name was Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee was in the field of serving as a building construction person. So he was finishing his degree in building construction and was taking a course at the Williams Temple Church of God in Christ with Dr. D.R. Williams, pastor. He was preparing to become a minister. He was from one of the people that came out of Jacksonville here to the University of Florida. So he came over to the reference desk and asked for information on Charles Harrison Mason, the founder of the Church of God in Christ in Memphis, Tennessee. And so he came to me, he said, can you help me? Because he said, I'm in this class and I have to talk about this gentleman and the history of the church. I told him, well, let's see what we can find. We didn't find anything. All right, from that point, I said, give me a few days, and we're going to help you to locate information that will support your research of knowing the history. So we took a couple of days. I went to Interlibrary Loan and spent time with Marva Coward. Marva sent out queries in Tennessee and other places to the Library of Congress and others, trying to find information on this Pentecostal church. And she came up with a little package, and when she came back with the package, she gave it to me. I went through the packet, and I said, oh, this isn't enough. This is just going to say who he is and when he was born, but not very much about the church itself. So we took it a step further. I gave the information to Mr. Lee. He carried it over and shared it. And he said, well, can you help me with any more? I said, yes, we're going to go further. So I went to the National Archives because I knew at that time I had a background in archival science and I was really good at maneuvering. I'm not bragging, but I could get what I wanted. So what I did with the National Archives, I asked them what did they have in their system relating to African American blacks in the Holiness Pentecostal sanctified type churches, storefront churches, all of those type churches. They had materials on the Baptist churches, on the Methodist churches, some on Catholics, but they had practically zilch on these organizations. So they told me, said, whatever you locate, we will use, and we will help you to get this project started. So I went over to the Institute of Black Culture, and some of you remember that, and I talked to Bill Simmons. Bill Simmons was an AME pastor. And so Dr. Simmons said, wow, so this is real? I said, yeah, this is real. I said, very little is out here. I said, they have not publicized themselves and put themselves in sources where they can be found and used for research. So after that, he said, okay, what do you want to do, Sherry? I said, we're going to start a program for that. And we did. With Dr. Simmons, Dr. Simmons said, what I'm going to do is go over and talk to the deans. And at that time, we had an African-American dean, and he was also a friend of mine. His name was Scott. Dr. Scott and I had courses at the University of Michigan together, so we had a connection already. And then when Bill went over, I said, Bill, Dr. Simmons, went over and spoke to him. He said, okay, I'm going to go to Art Sandine. Now, I don't know if you know these names, but he was the head of the Division of Student Services at the University of Florida. And we went to the vice president. He said, let's go to Donald Price. I don't know if any of you remember him, but Donald Price said, yes. He said, I am in sponsored research, and let's see what we can do. And then he said, well, let's go get Sam Hill. Samuel Hill, if you know who I'm talking about, Sam came in the meeting and said, oh, yes, he was in charge of social ethics at the University of Florida. They told me to write a proposal, and let's see what we can come up with. So I wrote the proposal that emphasized doing research on African American, the Pentecostal movement in the United States. I had to cut it to the U.S. in order to get the funding, mainly in the southern states of the United States. So I turned it in, and we got the pilot study. The first study was just $500, but that was a lot of money in the 70s, late 70s. So when I got the money, it was to go to North Carolina to talk with Ithia Clemens. And by the way, 2 weeks from now, I will be doing a lecture series at Princeton on him. And I have been doing this now for 4 years. So then this year we'll do it again, and this will bring forth some more history on Bishop Clemens and the Church of God in Christ. So we went to Greensboro, and then in Gainesville we used Dr. T.A. Wright, Thomas Wright. I think most of you know him. Thomas Wright said, this got to go. He said, I want you to go to Howard University. So yes, he provided for me a way to go to Howard University to meet with the dean. And when I got to Howard University and I told them what we were after, Dr. Jones was the dean at that time. He said, okay, now you're going to go see James Tenney. James Tenney is the expert on the Pentecostal churches in the United States. I said, okay. So I followed through with what these people asked, came back with that first little bit of information, wrote a substantial grant for funding. And we were able to get funding through the National Humanities Council, the International Business Machine Company, IBM. They gave me all the equipment that we needed. We went ahead and we got additional money from the National Council of Churches because they didn't know anything about this group either and what we stood for. And we got money from the Southern Regional Education Board out of Atlanta. The Lilly Endowment. Most of you know Lilly Endowment for drugs and medicines. Well, they have an educational division for religion as well. And I won't name some of the others other than Gatorade. Gatorade was one of our backbones because they paid for the students to work in the project. The project was held at the Institute of Black Culture, and it was just opened up. And then we had the students to come from Black Studies and from other areas on campus. We tried to hire as many minorities as possible. That was a part of it to make sure we could get the information that we needed. So Alma Johnson Small, who was the secretary at the IBC, oversaw the students during the day because I had to go teach those classes and I had to work the reference test and we had everything else that had to be done as well. So after we got the project started and we got it set, I went back to the Library of Congress and to other people that I had dealt with, and they helped me to get it out to all of the major libraries in the U.S., just in the U.S. And then we sent out questionnaires asking them what they have. What they didn't have was usually what we received back. But we were able to move this, what we call the Pentecostal initiative, forward. And we published our first book on the Pentecostal movement, which was a biographical dictionary. These folk had never had biographies done, so a lot of interviews were done. We had to do interviews in order to find out who they were and what they stood for. Yes, we went to the major church leaders to gather that type of information. And I just want to read you what Bill Simmons wrote in the foreword of our book. He said, "It is surprising to learn that Pentecostalism in America began with an African-American preacher in Los Angeles, California, which I will tell you about in a moment. From the publication, Pentecostals, as well as other black denominations, will gain pride in the knowledge that the black church was in the forefront of a multicultural religious movement in America. This dictionary should stimulate research and encourage our youth to gain a greater appreciation for the many contributions of blacks in America." And this was his statement given in the front of our book. And the book, I did not bring a copy, but I had my husband to go online to try to find copies for me, and there's so few copies now that are open. The copies that people have, they won't get rid of them. It was put in 19 languages, especially in the African languages, so that people could be able to read and understand what was available. And so we were very proud of that. But the book right now really needs to be updated and reprinted. Now, in this book, you have pictures, and I'm going to turn this around so you can see. This is a picture of Charles Harrison Mason, the founder of COGIC. We say COGIC instead of saying all of the acronyms. And the history and the background that we found on this man has been just fantastic, and he's one of my favorite characters. And I talk about him, especially when I go to Princeton. because they all want to know who he was and what was done. And how did we get what we call the different forms of religious backgrounds. The next picture is a picture of William J. Seymour. William J. Seymour found what was known as the Azusa Street movement. The Azusa Street movement started what they call early integration in the churches. In 1906 through 1909 was 24-hour church. It never ceased, never ceased. People were there, people came from all over the world. This is how the true Pentecostal movement was founded. Now, some will say it was founded in the Methodist Church. Yes, because you had sanctification in the Methodist Church. And that is one aspect of it. But the true meaning of carrying the missions from one location to another was with William J. Seymour. Also with William J. Seymour, this was their church location. And this was located, it's called the Apostolic Faith Gospel Mission. And this was located in Los Angeles, California. It was a stable. But even before that, it was a Methodist church. So this is the history, part of the history that we have been able to bring out to the public. Now, in finding history on these men and the background of the church, my favorite source was the FBI files. Oh, yes. I had to get permission. Santa Fe had to go through the nth degree to get me certified. Oh, yeah. It took about 6 months for my certification so that I could receive records from all over the country and from different areas relating to these pastors and so forth. But it is documented history. It's the best history you can find. And of course, dissertations and so forth rely on this history. Why? Because these ministers were watched daily. These were black people influencing other people. And they were there for World War I and World War II. And when you're influencing other people, especially poor people, and giving them a sense of place and helping them to get an education, you are going to be watched. Not only are you going to be watched, you're going to be handled in ways that are not good, such as being put in jail for nothing. Or putting in jail and say, well, look, you got to pay $2,000 to get him out of jail tomorrow. And the churches raised that money, and they paid to get these gentlemen out of jail so that they could continue the Pentecostal movement. So much of it that we have not heard or known about, but it is important. Now, the community engagement here in Gainesville. I have to come home to my people. Yes, the church was Williams Temple Church of God in Christ was one, but we have several Pentecostal churches in Gainesville. And of course, you know the Buchanans were in the Pentecostal church. Joel's mother was the mother of the church. And so, you know, I was right there able to hear her and gather information. And we have been interviewing people from the community, and we just interviewed a lady that was 100 years old, and she was a Buchanan. And she knew Joelle, because they had a nickname for him, and I won't go through that right now. But the concern was, yes, community engagement has to be a part that what the University of Florida and the community can work together to get done. And we bridged that gap. Yes, we bridged that gap. We bridged it not only for the Seminary area, or the Seminary Lane area, but we talked about East Side and the underserved people. We gathered churches such as the Church of God by Faith, found in 1914 over in Alachua, Florida. And you had the McKnights living right here in Gainesville. The founders, one of the founders died just a year or so ago. But the point of it is, these folks have been totally ignored when it comes to the academicians and the knowledge of knowing who they were, who their students were, how they survived, and what they have done for the society. So yes, it has been an uphill battle, but it has been an uphill great battle, because now we have a big network. Our conference is coming up next week in California. The Society for Pentecostal Studies is global, and the African Americans stand out. In fact, just this morning I got a call, and they were trying to tell me how many people that were Pentecostal that had been in Ukraine. they gave me 5 churches that were UPC churches. This was Universal Pentecostal. I use the acronyms. But the AG churches were the Assembly of God. There were 6 that they gave me this morning. And they gave me the names of some of the people that had been killed in those and some of the problems that they're having. But see, the Church of God has its own planes. See, these are things that we don't know about. They've got some wealthy Pentecostal people out here, and they have been flying into areas and carrying goods that we would not know about because the newspaper doesn't cover us, but it covers other religious groups. They have covered a little bit on the Roman Catholics, but very little religion. But this morning I got the update before I came here this afternoon as to how they are struggling to help the people in these hidden areas right now. Now, the religious engagement outcomes have been many, because if we do this research, we have to have the material where people can find it. It's no good under your bed, in your closet, around the corner, or Susie's holding on to it. It has to be where it can be found and used. And so this has been done in a very strong way. Our religious engagement has caused our materials to go to mainly major libraries. Our largest collection right now is the Library of Congress Manuscript Division, and that opened in 2019, just last year. And it didn't open to the public with a finding aid until 2020. And so that one I'm very, very proud of, and it is one of the largest. That's in Washington, D.C., and it carries several religious groups that are what we call Pentecostal, holiness, sanctified, and so many women groups. See, this is another aspect. We have people calling and asking, well, did you know Sister so-and-so was a bishop? No, but I'll find out who and where she was. And we do that to help them. So anyway, the largest collection right now is in Manuscript Division. Our second collection in D.C. is at the Anacostia Museum. That one went in 2005. We have a collection in Wisconsin, the University of Wisconsin, with the newspapers. They have 70-some newspapers that they had never heard of until we sent them. And these are Pentecostal papers. Some of them are just little sheets of paper. But they put them out weekly and monthly. And so now those papers have been recorded in major sources so others can find them. We also have a collection at the University of Southern California. And that one is large with several other Pentecostal groups coming in. And when I say Pentecostal, we are talking not just U.S. anymore. We are global people. We are global, and we talk about, I guess, so much material from Africa. Some days I don't even know if I can look at anymore, because they are sharing and they want to know what to do and how to go forward. So these are the 4 major collections, and we serve as a clearinghouse to direct you to where you need to go. So religious engagement outcomes are growing, and the University of Florida has been a key to help us in having these collections grow. But one thing I must say, and I thank the University of Florida for, is the oral history program, because so many of these folks have been interviewed and their history has been saved, and it will be available to others. And these folks are so proud. We get calls all the time. And we have people now that will send us a bag of obituaries. We were going to throw these things out, but now they see a value. They know that we are included in society. And when these students graduate from PhD programs and so forth, we are listed. And on the Google Scholars, we are one of the highest listed under Black religion. And so we are extremely thankful for what has been done in the past. We want to thank you for the study questions that we have, and we want to thank you for the references. But one thing I will stress with the Gainesville Sun article that came out in the newspaper this week, and I am going to read just a portion of it. Dr. Gordon, as it relates to UF, the goal was and still is for the African Studies program to become an academic department on this campus. And the statement is here, but let's go down a little bit further. Then when I was interviewed, they asked me, well, what do you think about that, what he says? I said, the purpose of community engagement is defined as collaboration between institutions of higher learning and the local community. And then they quoted me as saying, saying, institutions of higher learning have African American studies programs instead of academic departments. The distinction is that professors work for a program do not have the status, the pay, or opportunity at the tenure tracks as those who work for academic departments. And that was put in the Gainesville paper. And one of my friends commented, she said, girl, you bold. You let that go? And I said, yes. I told her the truth, and so I wanted to make sure that it was shared. And I have no problems with it. I said, we need to tell the truth so that we can move forward. And so I wish to thank you for this opportunity to share history with you. And I love this book. And next year, I'm not going to even get out to California next week, but next year I will be taking this book, and then also we're going to have the chapter put into the Society for Pentecostal Studies journal. And I used to serve on that journal for 8 years, and that worked me just like a wild woman. I mean, I didn't get very much rest and sleep. But the point of it is, this is going much further than local. This is going global, and thank you.
Wow, that is fantastic. Thank you, Sherry. I appreciate that. It's time for discussion, but before question and answers, I do want to acknowledge one additional person, very critical in producing this book. Every chapter in that book has photos, pictures, captioned. I insisted on captured photos. Guess who did all of that? Deborah Hendricks. Let's give her a nice hand. The other acknowledgement is what you already know. It's about the Oral History Project at the university. I like to consider the Oral History Project as the archive of the community. It is the archive of the community. That's where you preserve the history of the community. Oral history is critical. There is no history without oral history. Even though we're denied about oral history for a long, long time, Europeans said oral history was no history. They didn't really know what they're talking about. History is oral, and it's about observation, traveling, seeing people, observing. So I want to thank Dr. Paul. Thank you so much for initiating that oral history. It is very critical to use it as the archive of the community. Thank you so much. Okay, now question and answer. Any questions, observations? Before I think Carol has some food for us, some dinner.
I have a question.
Please.
You talk about the value of oral history. How do you overcome when you come into the African American community and they don't really trust the University of Florida?
I know. We had the same thing in Vassar. There is always an attempt to separate community from the university. And that is the premise for African American studies. That was the challenge, to challenge the academy. That it's not enough to produce knowledge until you begin to use that knowledge. We have become a knowledge-based society. And you can't just do it and keep it in the archives. You have to take it to the people. What's the essence of research if it's not for improving the quality of people? So it's a challenge to those of us at the university, as well as those of us in the community. Remember now, professors at the university are also members of the community. Sometimes we don't realize that. We are part of the community, representing the community, doing some work on the university, but we got to engage the community. We got to build some trust to begin with. If there's no trust, there is no good product. Okay? There's lack of trust. And then there's also the color line. And I went to the University of Kansas in 1970. I was told not to hire anybody unless they were black. So I looked at the student's face. I said, look at me. Do you see how black I am? I used to teach European history. American diplomatic history was my PhD. Do I look like a European? No. If you have a toothache, does that make you a dentist? I don't think so. You have to study dentistry. So there's an assumption in the black community, even in Africa, when I go down there, that because I'm black, I know about black history. No, you don't. You have some experience as a black person. That does not make you a black historian. You have to study it. You have to look at history, partaking in all these disciplines, and focus on it. Our contribution to society. People are denying that contribution. They are still doing it. Now there's a big talk now about, what do they call it? CROT, whatever that is. Has nothing to do with teaching African American history. It's a legal philosophy, a legal theory that was very useful in trying to explain the role of race and racism in American law. Yes, ma'am.
I think Sherry wanted to reply.
I saw somebody raising hand.
But to that question.
Oh, to that question? Okay.
To your question in regards to working with the people in the community, you have to get in the community and be a part of the community, and they have to see you in the community. Yep. And I had 3 kids, and I had to have babysitters, and I went to school, back and forth, carrying them to school and so forth. And not only do you have to be in the community, they have to learn to trust you.
Yes.
To a certain degree. And Joelle Buchanan helped me out. His mother helped me out. Several people, Elder Williams, who was the pastor, and they introduced me, and if it had not been for T.A. Wright, a lot would not have been done, because he and his wife would come to my house and tell me, you need to check with this person, you need to check with that one, and I followed through. And he would go with me sometimes if I was in a situation that was not too good, and introduce me to the community. You've got to get in there to deal with the people. And this has caused us to travel all over the country, gathering this information. You don't go by yourself. That's the key thing. My husband taught me that. He always checks out the community ahead of time and makes sure it's an area where I can go in and go out safely. And sometimes he'll get a couple of people to go with me. Now, you think this is real for other cultures, it's real for us, because we have to be able to go in and get out and speak to the people. You got to know a contact person. You don't go walking in these communities without contact people. And then these contact people will direct you to who you need to see and how you need to operate. And like here in Gainesville, I was about to get robbed one day downtown. I'm going to tell you this story. And I was walking right down there by the courthouse. And the guy was getting ready to take my purse off the side. And the guy jumped out and he said, no, she's not about that.
Ooh.
He knew that I had been to their church. And he said, she's not about that. And 4 or 5 of them came out there so fast it wasn't funny. And it was so fast that I didn't even know what was happening. And he said that they were getting ready to take you down. And so because I had been in the community and they could relate to who I was left with my purse. And I didn't get knocked down. But 2 of the guys did get knocked down because they went to it back there. But, that's life. So you got to be daring a little bit. And I say that to say that we deal with Sapelo Island and people up there. When I go to Sapelo, we always make sure I have at least 2 people. I want a man and a woman to go with us so that they can help us to understand the brogue, the language. Because if you don't understand the language, you're going to say something wrong or upset the people. So as long as you have that going for you, you can go anywhere you want to.
Very true.
I'd also like to comment. So I think that, and I'm also going to acknowledge my positionality in this as a white woman, right? I think that it is very important to acknowledge the very real justification that communities have a reason to mistrust agents of the university. And I think that all of us are, or at one time were, agents of the institution. And even though I think we have good intentions, impact and intention are not always the same thing. And so I think whether or not it's oral history, any type of community engagement or community-centered work, I think has to be a true partnership in which the institutional partner has to be willing to hear and understand the perspectives of the community and understand what that hesitation and the core of that mistrust may be. Because there's a reason for it. And that reason is sometimes ancestral, that the harm that has been caused by the institution, whether that's the city, whether that is the university, is generational. Mm-hmm. And it is currently happening. We currently have the university dismantling Black communities. And so it's intergenerational, but it's also simultaneously happening. And so when we as agents of the institution want to engage and partner with community, and there is this hesitation, there is this suspicion, especially when it's somebody who looks like me, I think that it is, I expect that suspicion, and I expect to have to earn trust and constantly be earning trust. I don't know if that's answering the question, but I just think that that's important to contribute.
It's a perspective. And I would like to say that, too, the community has a responsibility because things are more open now. People in the community can walk into libraries, they can walk into programs, sometimes they have to do, get an appointment or whatever, but they need to look and investigate. And don't just let people come in and take information and leave. They can follow up. Now things are so much more transparent than it used to be. So there is that ability to be empowered to go and see where is that information going and how is it being used.
Yep. Amen.
And so I think that is another thing that the community, people in the community, not just all the community, people in the community who want to, they have a strength now that perhaps was not there before.
Well, this question, Carol, is such an important question. And the Proctor Oral History Program, we do field work now in basically 5 different continents, in the U.S. all the way from Boyle Heights to the South Bronx. And one of the things we've discovered is that it's never the case that there's just one community. That's a very important thing I teach my students from day one. So one example is we've done a lot of field work in the town of Elaine, Arkansas. Those of you familiar with African American history know this is where one of the worst anti-Black massacres in U.S. history occurred. We were called in 2019 to help document the 100th anniversary of the Elaine Massacre, a massacre where federal troops just back from France were redeployed to shoot down African American farmers in broad daylight so that rich plantation owners from the Arkansas Delta could take their land. Now, this is a town of 750 people. And you cannot refer to one community even there. There are multiple communities, multiple layers. And so that's the thing we have to learn also, I think, as researchers, that there are controversies. But one of the things I think that has made them a believer in us, and we have to, is to echo what you were saying, Stephanie, we have to earn the trust of people in places like Elaine, places like Boyle Heights, places like Gainesville, places other places that we do field work in. But the reason we've been able to be successful, I think, is that we try to tell people we don't want to just record your story and put it on a shelf. Whether it's like I started in the analog era in oral history, and we use the term shoebox to refer to cassette tapes. Remember those? Would end up in a shoebox in a university library somewhere. As a grad student, one of my jobs was to try to find these in the back of Duke University libraries. And I found the most incredible oral histories that have been done in the early 60s with like the original members of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. They had been lost because people just, after they did the interviews, they just didn't care to do anything with them out into any kind of community. And so that's what we're really trying to do now. And with all of the expertise we hear in this panel, I essentially take my guidance from everyone here and to say that what can we do to get this material out back into the schools, into the libraries, into the public, because it doesn't do any good if it just sits in a university bureaucracy. So that's one of the things.
Trust, as a director of the Student Sports Service Upward Bound program, I tried to get the university administration to get into the community. They had a great opportunity. We have parents who are out there who could have served as a resource. These parents could have, helped them bridge that gap between that divide that's on that, especially on that east side of Gainesville to the University of Florida. And I had all kind of problems trying to get the university to move in that direction. But what we did was we took the Upward Bound program especially into the community. I was definitely involved. I participate in the church and a lot of activities. People knew me. Matter of fact, I don't even live in Gainesville. They thought I lived in Gainesville. I was in there so much dealing with it. So they could have used me as a conduit to help bring the university and the community, black community especially, together. But they refused to do it. I had a lot of pushback from the administration about why are you doing this, that, and the other. Well, it really, that question was, why are you doing that for those black kids? That's what it was about, okay? So, but I didn't, get too blown out of shape, but I did at times, I had to really just say a few things that they really didn't appreciate. But my thing was, I wanted to try to pull the university and the community together, but there are administrators who just didn't want that. They were questioning me a lot of times about, why am I doing this? Why am I taking these kids here? Why am I doing it? And especially, I told you about the parents, they had their own funds. They didn't like that. They really didn't like that. They wanted to control the parents. And that's not what it's all about. You don't have to control people. Have some guidance, have some coordination with help those parents who even do better than what they were doing. But that wasn't the case. It was just a one way. That was us coming to the University of Florida or going back in the community. I could never get the administrators to do things that were going to be supportive of what we're about. And trust, they didn't trust me about what I was doing. And I didn't trust them about some things they were doing, because I was in some of these meetings with university personnel, and they were talking about the kids that I was working with. And I said, well, this is what I really did. And this is on the Student Support Services side. I'm in this meeting and with the deans and some other people, and they were talking about the college side of our program. Why are you letting these kids come through this program? You know who they are, and you got to be careful of getting these kids from the bachelor's level to the master level, et cetera. That was a problem. And so they didn't quite say exactly, about my students, but I knew who they were talking about. So after the meeting was over, it was getting ready to terminate, and I jumped and said, no, we can't leave here now. I said, you're talking about those kids that I'm servicing. you haven't even looked at your own research, because you did your research and you find out that these kids that came in with the low SATs and all that, they were still graduating. They were graduating, okay? That's what it was all about. Now you don't want them to go into the master's and the doctoral programs. You didn't want them to do that. So I was real hot when I left there, and so I got a call that night from one of the guys. He said, "Mingo, you seem like you were really upset. You ready?" And I really said a curse word. You're right, okay? And I was really upset. They didn't want to talk to me anymore because I'm doing something to help the University of Florida to get these kids. We brought them in here. We were having the right attitude. And they were graduating, and they were not assisting. So it was a lack of trust that I had with the administration. And that was the same thing in the community, the black community. They didn't go out there. I was out there, and they didn't help me to generate that kind of like two-way transition. So, yeah, there's a problem with trust. Yeah, problem with trust, yes.
And we should be able to hear from Dr. Shaw, because a lot of his writings talk about that.
Yes.
Dr. Shaw talks about the lack of trust and how the administrators would not listen to him and how he was treated and working at the University of Florida. So I respect exactly what you're saying. And I want to say to you, when we were there, we went to D.C. with you all. That was Pat Moran and I to help get funding. And so we, again, say thank you. And then also we put together a manual for your students, because they didn't have anything to work with. And we struggled to get that together. And we paid out of our pockets part of the money to get the copies made. And I'm telling you what I know. And so I know what you had to go through, and I really respect you. And you kept us encouraged. Some days you didn't know it, but just to see you walk across campus was an encouragement to us. Thank you.
I think we have room for one more question or something like that. Or comments? Yes, please.
Congratulations on the book and the work that all of you are doing and have done. What's the dialogue about the administration change and what it will mean for this program, this department that you're working on?
Well, they have already made the changes. The challenge now is to make it happen. The dean has committed, I think, 5 full-time faculty positions. He has given money to recruit a new director who's already here. He's just been here. So he has been busy trying to really build it up. First of all, you've got to have the faculty. They already don't have the faculty yet. They need the faculty to have a department.
Right, I understand that, but programs can be defunded.
Do you mean the UF, like, president administration change? Okay.
Oh.
Because Fox is leaving.
Oh,
or stepping down from the president.
For the president.
And being endorsed by.
Yeah.
I let the faculty
Maybe
members.
Paul should take this one.
Paul should take this one. He's your leader.
I can't speak forever. I mean, really, the question is a question for all of us. And I want to kind of turn this around. Hopefully this doesn't sound like I'm dodging the question, but we have just come out of a very challenging state legislative session, which was aimed at attacking education at all levels.
Yeah.
This state is gunning for K through 20 education. They're trying, and I know I'm in public, they're trying to privatize public education in the state of Florida. That's the long game. The immediate attack is on our weakest flank, and we've been talking about this all evening. Critical race theory, critiques of systemic racism, discussions of inequality, conversations that might make certain individuals feel bad, okay? That's our weakest flank right there. And we looked at the rule last spring very carefully in the College of Education. We started giving workshops with teachers and community organizers all across the state. Now I spend a lot of my time out of the state because I'm going up north, And I'm telling our dear colleagues up there who think, oh, well, you know, Florida is such a circus. It can't happen up here. And I'm there to tell them it is going to happen. And so this question, I apologize, Dr. Gordon, because I know I started by thinking about African American studies, but we're going to have to defend what we people have built in this book. We're going to have to defend it with all the creativity and coalition building and trust building that we can possibly muster. Because all the work that Dr. Mingo has done, all the work that Professor DuPree has done, that Dr. Gordon has done, all of that work right now is in jeopardy. And I just want to be candid with you. It is in dire straits. Because again, we have people who are in the seats of power. Let me give you one example. During the tail end of the state legislative session, because I'm the president of the United Faculty of Florida, I have to be mentally engaged with the entire legislative session. Lucky me. Those attacks on critical race theory here and on the 1619 history curriculum and on any discussions about racism, those attacks were directed not just from the usual suspects in Tallahassee, those attacks came largely from outside of the state. We kept on hearing, yeah, these think tanks in California, in New York, are directing all of this firepower to try to get Florida to become the first state that completely bans discussions of systemic racism. Okay? So this is, I'm not trying to, I don't want to create a fear thing, but I'm just saying that we're all going to have to kind of find ways to come together to defend what we have already and what these colleagues here and what you all have worked so hard to build, because it is under threat. But here's a positive thing. I'll end on a positive note. The reason we're under this dire attack is because the people in power, the ruling class in this country, understands that the earth is shifting underneath their feet. They understand that African American Studies is one of the most popular majors in the University of Florida. Yeah. But it's also one of the most popular majors at UCLA. Yep. It's also one of the most popular majors at Arizona State University. It's also a demand of black and brown students that have made it a requirement in the state of Connecticut that to graduate from high school in the state of Connecticut, you must take a sequence in African American history, Puerto Rican history, and Latino history. It's not an elective anymore, it's a requirement. Why? Because younger people have demanded it, high school people, their parents or teachers. So the earth is changing, the country is changing, but the people in power are trying to stop it from changing. Mm-hmm. So that's our challenge.
So I think that it doesn't bode particularly well that also the search will be, now they're allowing it to be like out of sunshine law. Or that's what they're trying to do. I don't know if that has actually passed or not. Okay. Yeah. So I guess we'll maybe be surprised by who gets hired. But you know, I'm not sure if that will mean that it will have someone who's hostile towards African American studies coming in. Don't know how that, you know, if I had a crystal ball, perhaps, you know, we could tell you the answer of how that will impact the future for the development of the program into a department. But I think that Paul's right on target with what he said. The other thing that, shoot, sorry, my mind just blanked, but oh man, that is the big thing that I wanted to say, is that I think that is a significant threat. And then another thing that has happened is in the libraries, lines are getting cut, faculty lines. There's also the attack on, in addition to that, faculty tenure that they're coming, like states like Georgia in particular have completely gone after tenure. Florida is trying to do something similar to make it easier to basically penalize tenured faculty. So I think that there are implications there that make it harder for folks who are doing good work, who are tenured, folks like Paul, folks like Manushka Celeste, who are tenured now in African American studies, who are trying to push things forward, who are once in perhaps a position of safety to do the kinds of research, like the folks who are suing the university for academic freedom, who are in a position of safety because they had tenure, and if this passes, are now no longer safe, right? Because the state wants to come after tenure. And then also attacks on the union, right? So it's like attacks on every angle that are not necessarily specifically driven towards African American studies, but collectively, when you put all the pieces together, could have negative impacts against the work that we're trying to do.
A couple of things just triggered something in my mind here about something that happened to me. It's about but trust and the fact that I was also suing the institution. I tried to file suit, or I did file suit against the University of Florida. I didn't get anywhere, okay? And it was mainly because they were just not treating me like they should have been treated. And they really were trying to kick my butt out of there. After I got my PhD, I got a letter from the dean said, now that you have reached the pinnacle in your career, you should look for tenures or green pastures elsewhere. Yeah, that's what I got. I got it in writing, y'all. Okay, that's what I got in writing. Okay, so what I did, I went to the dean and I said, I don't understand this letter. Oh, no. You shouldn't be all, don't be all locked into this trio program, these upper bounds. Don't lock it. You need to be looking for other places. You're talking about the greener pasture. I say, the greenest pasture that I know in the state of Florida is right here at the University of Florida. And why do you want me to go? So he shut up. Okay? Now, what I did, I went to the Taggart Hall to try to talk to me. Oh, you should have come. That's after I filed the suit. You should have come to me and talked to me earlier. Before you did that. Now, I waited until I got my drop papers all in place, everything. I had everything in lined up. Okay, I just made sure that I had things up, because I told them, if I had come to you all before now, you would have trumped up some charges. I wouldn't have got any kind of pension from the University of Florida. That's what happened to me, okay? And that's why I didn't want to write this thing either, you know? I didn't want nothing to do with it, but yeah, I think I need to let y'all know that's what happened. Now, I just didn't trust them at all, because what they had done to me. Now, and I guess my attitude and well, I think I better stop.
Wait, one more.
Yeah. I'm going to have to go along with what he said, because I came to the University of Florida in 5 years. I had reached tenure. The people in the department voted for me to have tenure. The people in the library system voted for me to have tenure. And when it went to the vice president, and I can call his name, and those over there, they turned me down. And the man told me, well, you only been here 5 or 6 years. You haven't been here long enough. Most of these people have been here 15 and 20 and 30 years before we consider them. And they hadn't done anything to bring knowledge to the institution. At that time, I had 3 books in the marketplace, and they were doing very well. And they act like it didn't exist. So I know exactly what you were saying, and that's why I left. I mean, that's the truth, and I will tell anybody that.
I'd like to say something, because it's on my mind.
Please do.
I'd like to say to Dr. Mingo and to y'all that Dr. Mingo was one of the best directors that we had in Upper Bound. Because myself, being a single parent, I had 6 kids, and all of them went through Upper Bound except one. And the reason why he didn't go through Upper Bound, because they had cut out 2 or 3 and just with 1. But they all, sometimes when I think about Upper Bound, it just get me feel up. But one thing I can say, that Each one of those kids that went through that program up under Dr. Mingo, they had a choice to go to any school, university, or junior college. But every one of mine that went through that program, they graduated from the university to FAM. They got 2 degrees, and they're doing well, and I just thank God for Dr. Mingo.
I don't know how long you plan to stay, but I'm gonna use my prerogative here. I know we can be here all night long and talk. We need some more action, though. I don't want to minimize the problem. I don't want to minimize that at all. But let me close by quoting Frederick Douglass. There is no progress without what? Struggle. You got to struggle to get anywhere. There is no progress without struggle. Doesn't matter where we are. We've come a long way. They think they are going to just stop us from talking about Black history. The Black history is a part of American story. We can't stop doing that. Karaji was in phase in the early 1920s. We've come a long way, baby. They can't take us back. We've gone too far now. They are dreaming. They are scared to death. About what? The truth. That's all. They want us to tell only the good, nice things about American history. But that's not history. It's a field of critical inquiry. The good, the bad, the beautiful, the ugly. It's a part of our history. We can't deny that. And to deny these young people understanding their history in a global context is miseducating our young people. That's what Woodson wrote, the miseducation of the Negro. These folks are about to miseducate American people. We have been doing it for a long time. It got to stop. And so with that, I want to thank you for listening to us, and we really appreciate you. Thank you, Carol, for the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Before you leave, please, we have lots of refreshments, and I need you to take it home. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Mr. Bradley. Winston Bradley? No, but it's got to be related. Yeah, the editor. He was, he's an elder.
Oh, so you and I can start a real